I'm going to cover personality today, and it's going to be more practical work than theory. So I'm going to get you to do a personality test. We'll discuss your experience, and then we'll try a very different one from the Big Five. You might have already heard of the Big Five. And then we'll do some group discussion, and I'll also show you a video, okay? So it's a lot less theoretical stuff or research. So let's give you an idea about the approach or theoretical perspective that is taken in terms of understanding personality. One way of understanding personality is trying to understand the different characteristics of the human being in terms of traits. And the trait approach proposes that the differences in our personalities, okay, all of us are not the same. Some of us are more friendly than others. Some of us are more confident than others. And these differences are best characterized in terms of something called traits. And traits are characteristics or attributes that are enduring. So when I say enduring, I mean long-term. It's stable. You don't just change your trait on a daily basis. Okay? It's something that stays with you almost throughout life. And possibly innate, so meaning some of these traits you inherited from genetically from your parents. And traits predispose every one of us towards certain patterns of thinking. So if I'm a conscientious person, I will think about my studies or my work in a particular way that is different from other people, okay? Compared with another person who is less conscientious. If I have a particular set of traits, I will have a particular type of thinking and a particular set of behaviors that go with this trait. And I'll give you examples more later on. And these traits are essentially consistent over time because the kind of behaviors or thoughts that I express are consistent with this trait. Okay? And across situations as well, which is important. So if I have a friendliness trait, I should be friendly in any situation, and I should be friendly across time, meaning as I grow older, this friendliness still stays with me, still is a part of who I am. Okay? So traits, again, are enduring, underlying, possibly innate attributes like friendliness, or a quick temper, short temper, and is a basis for making predictions about what a person is likely to do in the future. So very simply put, if a person has a high friendliness trait, you'll be able to predict that this person is going to be very friendly and warm and talkative to people at a party. Okay? Compared with a person low on friendliness trait, you would expect in a party for this person not to really interact as much and certainly not as friendly and bubbly as the other person. So using trait, you can predict what these two people would do in a party or in a job interview, etc. Okay? And traits are very different from states. Okay? States is, it refers to temporary emotions, meaning you might have a fight with your best friend and you show aggression or you get very angry at your best friend during a fight. That doesn't mean that you're necessarily quick-tempered. That is not a trait. It's something that's temporary. You got angry because your friend did something against you. But you wouldn't otherwise show that behavior in other situations. Okay? So behaviors that change across situations, that change across time, are more likely to be states than traits. Okay? Traits are usually stable. And one of the most popular, if not the most popular, so this would be a measure that is very often used in research. If I wanted to study if music preferences is related to personality, I would use the Big Five. If I wanted to study whether different students pick certain subjects because of their personality, I would use the Big Five. If I was going to see if certain personalities are more likely to be at risk for schizophrenia, I would use the Big Five. So it's the most popular way to measure personality right now. Okay? And you will be doing the Big Five in a bit. And Cattell was the one who actually came up with the final version. And he actually just started off with a lot of adjectives that describe human characteristics. Adjectives like friendly, warm, angry, neurotic, confident, things like these. So he came up with more than 100 adjectives, any possible way to describe a human characteristic, okay, or personality traits. And he started reducing this data into different categories. And he used a method called factor analysis, which I'm not going to detail because I have to spend a whole class just teaching that. And factor analysis allows you, using a statistical method, to group variables or group, for example, adjectives together in terms of how related they are to each other. So you will see later on when I give you openness trait. Openness is a group of several different characteristics. So what Cattell did was he just used factor analysis to reduce and reduce and reduce until he got this final group of 5 different traits. And these 5 primary traits are made up of 16 primary trait dimensions. Okay? And so the overlap among the 16 trait dimensions, which I will not go into detail, was then reduced to these 5 major personality dimensions. So that's why you have the Big Five inventory. And when you're doing the Big Five in a bit, you'll be able to see why certain statements or certain characteristics would apply to certain traits. And the 5 major dimensions are useful because it describes people from childhood through old age and in many different cultural settings. So the Big Five has been used with children, teenagers, young adults, older people, and it has also been used in many different cultures. Now, we will talk a lot about the different cultures. Why is it some cultures find that among these Big Five, for example, openness doesn't apply to our culture, or maybe another trait, agreeableness, doesn't apply. So we'll discuss that more later on. So what are the Big Five traits? How many of you have actually heard of the Big Five? Okay, not that many. Good. At least we have space to learn. Extroversion, neuroticism, I'm going through each of them in detail. Agreeableness, conscientiousness, and openness to experience. So let's have a look at what extroversion is. You might actually already have heard about extroverts versus introverts. And extroversion refers to a trait where the person has an energetic approach to the social world or the physical world. So being energetic to the social world would be this person loves to interact with people, people from all walks of life, not really focusing on specific types of people, so to speak. And this person also has an energetic approach to the physical world. This person enjoys going to different places, being in physical contact with the environment, things like that. So compared with someone low on extroversion, someone low on extroversion would like to stay at home. Is a stay-at-home person. Okay? And so you can imagine someone, for example, like Lady Gaga. Of course, it's debatable because some say she's an introvert. For those of you who don't know who she is, never mind. But I would be surprised if you don't. That means you don't read any newspapers whatsoever. Okay. And a person high on extroversion often feels positive emotions and agree with statements like, I see myself as someone who is outgoing and sociable. Okay? And you see when you fill in your Big Five later on, other statements that would belong to extroversion. Any comments, questions, thoughts? Okay. Neuroticism refers to a trait where the person is prone to negative emotions. This person is always feeling worried, anxious, uncomfortable, unsettling, or being emotionally unstable, sometimes very happy and then suddenly gets very depressed very quickly. And neuroticism is constantly related to some kind of mental disorder or psychological illness, okay? Especially those who are extremely high on this trait. And people high in neuroticism would agree with statements like, I see myself as someone who is depressed, blue, okay? I assume you know what blue means rather than literally blue, okay? Agreeableness. This is someone who has, like Winnie the Pooh, has a trusting and easygoing approach to others. And this person would agree with statements like, I see myself as someone who is generally trusting. Okay? A person who is high on conscientiousness has an organized, efficient, and disciplined approach to life. Okay? And this person basically doesn't just do things randomly. There's always a plan. And this person agrees with statements like, I see myself as someone who does things ethically. So ethically could be ethically in the office, like this person doesn't go against the rules. This person doesn't take another person's project and use it as his own. Okay, these are ethical, this is ethical conduct. And then finally, openness to experience. And this person, a person who scores high on openness, is unconventional. Okay, this person doesn't behave or act like typical conventional people who do the same thing every day. Okay, this person likes to try new things, variation, and is intellectually curious. So you would expect this person to learn many different languages, to know how to cook maybe several different cuisines, things like that. And this person has an interest in new foods, ideas, and activities. And a person who is high on openness would agree with statements like, I see myself as someone who is curious about many different things. Okay? So using this big five, extroversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, neuroticism, and openness to experience, we can identify someone's personality by specifying where he or she falls along each trait dimension. So I could be very low on extroversion, high on agreeableness, low on neuroticism, high on openness, and high on conscientiousness. And all of us would rarely have the same high score for each dimension. Okay, there's always going to be highs and lows within the five big dimensions. So another example would be low in agreeableness. So this person is not very easygoing, and this person is also worrying a lot. This person is a very anxious person. Okay? Now, the big five also allows us to describe an infinite number of personality profiles. So it doesn't just give you one final personality score, okay? And that's the value of this inventory. It doesn't just say, okay, you are a friendly person, full stop. By giving you these five different traits, for example, agreeableness or conscientiousness, you can have a mixture of many different profiles, many different combinations. Okay, so some of you might be high on one, low on the other. Another group might be high on one, low on the other. And because you have these five dimensions, if you use mathematics, you can already figure out how many combinations there might be in terms of high-low scores across the five dimensions. Okay? And the big five is a self-report measure. Okay? So you can use it two ways. You could either ask the person to do it themselves. So I will ask you to fill out the big five yourself later on. When you're doing self-report, people will describe how much they agree with a statement. Okay? So when I give you a big five later on, you would have a choice of writing number 1 to 5 to indicate how much you agree with the statement. Now, of course, just as many of you wrote in your exam, doing a self-report requires self-knowledge. Sometimes we're not really sure how we are like, who we are. I may not be very sure, oh, am I an extrovert, or do I like going out, or do I not? And when you do your Big Five later on, I really want you to think about that. When you see a statement, I want you to think about how well can you answer it, and why is it difficult for you to respond to it. And it also requires honesty. Okay, we all have biases. Some of us might just want to agree more with a statement because we really like how this would describe us. So you really need a person to be 100% honest in response to these statements for you to get an accurate personality profile. Now, if you're worried about a self-report, you can do multi-informant, meaning you give the Big Five to other people to do. People who know this person well, of course, not just some random stranger on the street. So you gather information about a person from other people, and although potentially biased, so you might say parents are kind of biased towards a positive profile of their children, or perhaps a spouse might be biased. The data generally agree, meaning you usually see a consistent match. So what a parent, what a best friend or a dating partner say about you usually matches what you say about yourself. So far, the data, the research shows there is consistency or contingency across different data, whether it's self-report or reports from others. Okay? And so informant data also provides an important source of information about a person. So you could get data from parents, from teachers. These two would be the main informants. Okay? Parents, teachers, perhaps other people who go to church with this person, siblings, best friends, romantic partner, etc. Okay? And it's important for you to know that these 5 major traits is made up of a hierarchy of traits. Okay? It's not just openness to experience, full stop. Openness to experience is made up of several different traits. And each of these mini traits are made up of several different types of behaviors. And that's why on your Big Five, you don't just score how friendly do you think you are. This is not how the Big Five measures personality. It gives you statements. For example, is sometimes rude to others. Okay, it's a behavior. And these behaviors, there are 44 here. And these behaviors actually belong to a particular group of traits. And that group of traits belongs to one of the 5 Big Fives. Okay? So each major personality dimension is made up of many more dimensions of that characteristic. And each of them is made up of even more specific characteristics, which are themselves made up of specific behaviors. So let me give you an example. Openness to experience would relate to feelings and aesthetics. Okay? And feelings alone would relate to these 2 types of behaviors. A person high on feelings related to openness would be receptive to inner emotional states. This person really understands how he or she is feeling and is able to confront his or her own feelings. Rather than a person who is really sad but refuses to admit that he or she is sad. So this person is the opposite. This person is also values emotional experiences. So for example, enjoying how touching it might be to watch a sunset with another person, things like that. Or watching a highly emotional movie and crying like a baby as a result of that. Someone who is high on openness to experience would also be high on valuing aesthetics. Aesthetics means things like music, art, and poetry, or natural beauty. Okay, a person who really enjoys art, this person would enjoy going to the art museum a lot. This person would also like reading poetry or writing poems. This person loves music, not just listening to his iPod every day, but loving music in terms of trying out music from that genre, perhaps writing his own music, or really understanding music and playing music as well. Okay, so it's not just any type of appreciation for aesthetics. It has to reach a certain level. Of course, the big debate is, does Big Five apply to every culture in the world? Can our personalities be necessarily measured according to openness, agreeableness, conscientiousness? Maybe in some cultures, you don't actually have something called conscientiousness. And the Big Five has been tested in major countries in the world, but there are still so many cultures that we don't know if these Big Five traits apply. And studies that confirm the existence of the Big Five in a population do not show us whether these are the most frequent traits in that culture. So let's say we find that we can use the Big Five in Taiwan, but we don't know actually if all these 5 traits, openness, extroversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, and neuroticism, all 5 really apply to the Taiwanese culture. Maybe extroversion doesn't really apply because most Taiwanese fall in the middle. You don't actually get high scorers, so you don't really get a nice variation or distribution. So there's already a skewness in the scores for the Taiwanese culture. We are also not sure whether the Big Five is useful in predicting the same behaviors from one culture to the next. Okay? So for example, neuroticism, being very worried or anxious. In one culture, this might apply to social anxiety. So maybe one particular culture scores very high because they are constantly worried about having to interact with other people. They are very careful about social interaction. But in another culture, for example, neuroticism might not apply to social situation, but to work. This culture values work so much that they generally score very high on work behavior. They constantly worry about if their work is reaching the standard that is expected, but they don't really worry about interacting with people. So we're not too sure what kind of behaviors differ or vary across cultures in relation to the Big Five. Okay? And if you ask people from different cultures to generate personality terms on their own, there is the support for the cross-cultural generality, so whether or not the Big Five is generalizable, has been mixed. Because people from other countries come up with some personality factors that are different from the Big Five. So some cultures simply don't mention extroversion or agreeableness. To them, well, another personality trait explains our culture better than openness or than agreeableness, things like that. Okay? So let me give you the Big Five to do now, since we have so many who has not done it. And it should be quick. Now, I tried to get a Chinese version for the Taiwanese students. Unfortunately, they only have the Jianti version. And I didn't have time to quickly translate to Fanti. So try and cope with the English. If you don't understand a particular word, raise your hand and I'll come to you. And you can also think about, if you had a Fanti version, do you think you would respond differently to it? Okay? There is a reason why we have to translate, because some people feel they cannot respond accurately if it's not in their own language. Ready? Who has not finished? Okay. So, what do you think about having to complete the Big Five? Any thoughts? I won't do the scoring because scoring takes time. Okay, let's see which dimension you think some statements belong to. Okay, so talkative, number 1. Yes? Are you talking to yourself or are you talking to me? Okay, thank you. Tends to find fault with others. It will be agreeableness. Neuroticism is usually like self-worry, worry about things that the person is going through himself. Does a thorough job. Conscientiousness. Okay. How about 14? Can be tense. Neuroticism. Number 20. Active imagination. Active imagination. Openness. 21 tends to be quiet. Extroversion. So you can see number 1 and number 21, they would be grouped together. Now the reason why they don't, why is it you're answering statements that are all scattered around? Because they don't want you to have a response bias. If you group all the extroversion statements together, you might respond in a certain way. So it's better to just randomly scatter them around. 28, perseveres until the task is finished. Conscientiousness, okay. 37, rude to others. Agreeableness. Remember, neuroticism is anxious and worry. Not a lot of actually blaming others. Usually they worry about their own faults rather than worry about others. Okay? So tell me, what do you think about, was there any statement you felt that was difficult for you to respond to? Do any of you write 3, neither agree nor disagree, for any of the items? Tell me, roughly how many items did you write 3 for? Because that indicates you're not quite sure, right? How many items? Give me just shout out your totals. How many statements did you score 3 for? 10? 3? 11? 5? 4? So 3, 4, 5, 10, 11? 13? Any reaching 20? But 10 is already quite high. Why did you score 3? Are you not sure yourself? Or you don't think, yes?
I think in my case it's because it's difference in how I act at work and with my friends.
So if you don't mind, share what statement did you score 3 for?
I would say maybe, okay, let me see. It's easily distracted, for instance.
Number what?
Number 43.
43 is easily distracted, okay?
Yes. At work, I'm definitely not easily distracted, but I'm very concentrated and very focused on what I'm doing. When I hang out with my friends, I'm definitely one of those just very distracted and things and
okay.
Opposite. So.
Okay. Okay. So for this trait, you think it's situational for you. Okay? Any other thoughts?
I think if you think this description is changeable, and if you have the experience, for example, you may think you are distracted before. However, after some
right.
get better, then you may.
Yeah. So yes, you might feel that you used to be easily distracted, but after some training, after some experience, you're much better than you used to be. So one dilemma was situational, another dilemma was stability or consistency. Any other thoughts? How about our students from other cultures? You think the big 5, it's okay? Well, you could have a peep at the other items. This was for China. Okay, so I can see why it doesn't apply. I don't know if there's a Taiwanese version that is validated, meaning constantly replicated. Because usually if you want to translate one for a new culture or different culture, you translate it and then you have to give it to multiple groups and replicate it, and ask them to fill it out in different situations to see if you get consistency. Because if you get different responses at each time, there's something wrong with your measure, something wrong with your personality test. Because the idea of a personality test is to measure something stable, something possibly innate. Any other thoughts? Yes?
Maybe some cultures are more moderate, like they tend to choose the middle answers and never choose the extremes.
Yeah? Yeah? So some cultures are, can you guess which cultures? So your hypothesis would be Asian cultures would tend to pick 3. Do you agree? Oh, okay. We have quite a good agreement today. Okay, why? Why?
Maybe we're it might be.
I thought I heard wrongly. Did you say 孔子?
Yeah, I mean, some.
Sorry, but how does Confucius have to do with this?
Confucius.
Really? Okay. I don't actually know how to respond to that. Do you think it's a problem? Or it's not? Does it matter? So let me just put it out here. Does it matter if you know what your personality profile is? Do you feel different after you do a personality test? Oh, I know myself better, something like that.
I guess it's matter because maybe I will be influenced. Maybe it says, maybe I think, oh well, I'm talkative, so I will be more talkative in the future when I act to others.
So if you respond, you're very talkative, and then so.
After the result, I will guess that, oh, maybe I'm an outgoing person, so I will.
Okay. So you feel that your personality or your behaviors might be reinforced when you know what your profile is like. So if, let's say, a researcher or your professor tells you, oh, you score very high on extroversion or agreeableness, then you're more likely to consistently behave in a way that fits your profile. Okay, perhaps? Yes?
I think it's valuable also when you're understanding others. And when you know what kind of person you are, you understand that other people, for you it's obvious that of course everyone is talkative or is forgiving nature, but then you realize that everyone has different agendas, and if you do it together with others and discuss your differences, it's quite valuable, I think, especially if you, for instance, your family disagrees with your family and so on. Or,
What do you mean? Why would you disagree with your family?
no, but because I remember that when I was a teenager, I had an experience with my sister. We totally didn't understand each other at all. Then she studied psychology. She said that, yeah, but we see things in different ways. She like.
Okay. So at a social level, you feel you will understand another person more if you know their personality profiles.
Yeah, or you just understand that other people see things a different way. There's something so obvious for you, you even reflect on it when you reflect.
So for example, oh, you see things differently from me because I'm higher on openness and you are low on openness. Okay. Any other thoughts? There's another very popular application of personality profiles. Think about it. Yes?
At work, when hiring people.
How many of you have worked before or are working? And how many of you, for your work, you had to do a personality test?
Okay.
One. Yeah, I'm not sure. Like, I know in the military, you do have to do a personality test. They want to watch out for people high certain traits. Not necessarily using the big 5, but they look at those that measure aggression more easily or impulsiveness. You don't want an impulsive shooter in the police force or things like that. Or astronauts. In Malaysia, when we had astronauts going to space, they deliberately came up with a personality test to make sure these astronauts are not going to freak out when they're up there, because they could just kill everyone in one shot. So for certain high-risk jobs, I think personality tests are very important. There's another very popular application. Yes?
Dating websites.
Right, dating websites. Why do we need to know other people's personality profiles so that we can match them? But this is debatable, okay? Because research shows that there is a value to opposites attract. There's also some research to show similarity attracts. So I don't know how successful dating matching, these dating websites are. But one classic example from the research is or using research is, there was a professor in Cambridge when I was only a student, a master's student. He was teaching personality, and he actually told us a lot about the research he did for a dating website. So this is a researcher working for a dating website, but he was primarily interested in music preferences. He felt that you can really match people well based on what kind of music they prefer, not necessarily the whole personality profile. He felt it was better to match preferences to personalities rather than using traits alone. So, it has a good application, a proper application in terms of finding out personality profiles. Okay. Any other thoughts? All right. Before I continue, let me give you a break. So when you were filling out the big 5, some of you felt that you couldn't respond to certain statements accurately or appropriately because you felt that a certain statement might change for you in different situations. Okay? And so it's not surprising that we would have a debate focusing on whether certain personality traits are really innate or some are just simply situational. So some of us might call it the consistency controversy, or some of us might call it the person-situation debate. And it centers around the big question as to how consistent people are. Okay? If I score high on agreeableness, am I always agreeable across time, across situations? And studies have shown inconsistency in behaviors in different settings. And Michel proposed the personality paradox, whereby people behave much less consistently than a trait conceptualization would predict. So according to Michel, traits don't really explain behavior as well as we expected before, or as well as found, because their so-called traits seem to change according to different situations. So one evidence comes from low correlations. Okay, as I told you, correlation is a statistic that indicates relatedness, how related different behaviors or a trait and behavior is. So one evidence comes from finding low correlations between measures of traits taken in different situations. So for example, we might find that research shows us that the big 5 yields different scores in different situations. So this person seems to be high on neuroticism in one situation, but low on neuroticism in another situation. Why? Okay, that's a big question. Or another example would be a person may cheat in one situation, but not in another. Or a person may be very open to a particular activity, but not to another activity. Okay? So why is it people aren't more consistent than we thought, especially if we consider the trait approach? Well, because a situation can have very powerful effects. Of course, it depends on the situation itself. And you can think of the situation in terms of strong and weak situations. Strong situations are those where the environment provides clear guidelines for our behavior, that it is likely you are not going to show your trait in this kind of situation because you are adhering to the norm. You're following the norm or the custom or what people expect, the kind of behaviors people expect in that kind of situation. So examples would be like the courtroom. So you might be a very talkative person, okay, but that trait will not express itself in the courtroom because it's a situation where people have to follow a particular guideline. You will get thrown out of the courtroom if you talk too much. A fancy restaurant, for example, there are certain, if you're very adventurous, that's not the kind of place where you would try to be adventurous compared with a rowdy bar or a very unconventional bar. The church would be another example of strong situation. Any other strong situations you can think of? Yes?
Probably in a funeral.
Funeral? So certain customary events, funerals, weddings. Anything else? Yes? Hospital, in the hospital, yeah. Yes? Library? That's debatable. I've seen some very rowdy behavior in some libraries. Yes?
Depends on the company you're with. If you're with friends or with people you don't know really well.
Okay.
So with friends or family members, you're more likely to be like you really are, and you don't have to, act in a different way or something. But if you're with your boss or teacher, you behave differently.
So it might not have anything to do with the location, but the people you are with, yeah? Now, in contrast, you might have weak situations, for example, being at home alone, where there's no company and you're in your comfort zone, assuming your home is your comfort zone. So it's an environment which provides few guidelines. At home, when you're alone, if you're living alone, you can do almost anything you want. There's no guidelines in terms of how you would behave. Perhaps because you live in an apartment building, you can't play very loud music because you have certain guidelines for tenants or other residents, for example. Okay? So the idea in terms of strong and weak situations is in strong situations, situation determines the behavior, but you're more likely to see an individual's personality showing through in a weak situation. Okay? And you can try to identify how people behave differently according to the so-called guidelines or norms in terms of self-monitoring. Okay? Some people care more about how they behave according to others or according to the context than some other people. Some people might not care about guidelines or norms. And you can use a self-monitoring scale to assess how sensitive people are to their surroundings and how likely they are to change their behavior according to the situation. So high self-monitors would care a great deal about how they appear to others. And they would adjust their behavior to fit the situation. So for example, high self-monitors would behave differently in a church, a party, or a sports game. Okay? You would see less consistent behaviors because they are more likely to adjust. In a church, they would be solemn, but extremely extroverted and charming at a party, and cheer and heckle at an opposing team at a sports game. Excuse my typo there. Because when you're at a particular sports game, depending on the kind of sport, either soccer or football or baseball, you want to fit in with the rest of the audience. So you want to boo the opposing team or opposing fans in order to fit what people expect you to do, rather than supporting the other team. Low self-monitors, on the other hand, are less interested in how they appear to others. Okay, these kinds of individuals are more self-expressive. Their behavior is much more consistent across situations. So they would be quiet at the church. They would also be quiet at a party. And they would watch a football game or a sports game quietly and intently. Okay, so there are quite distinct differences between high self-monitors and low self-monitors. Now, consistency may also vary due to culture. You have certain cultures that value high self-monitoring, certain cultures that really value a person being able to adjust to certain situations. And you can also see differences in consistency in terms of how consistently people in different cultures describe themselves. Okay, some people might say, I'm quiet all the time in certain cultures. In other cultures, some people might say, well, I'm only quiet when I'm alone, of course. Or I'm only quiet when, I'm at work or school. Otherwise, I'm crazy. So you might have different cultures showing different types of consistency in their verbal reports. Or they might be different in terms of what their cultures want them to be. So one example, if you contrast the American culture and the Japanese culture, okay, Americans are relatively consistent, according to the research, in how they describe themselves, no matter whether they happen at a time to be sitting alone next to an authority figure or in a large group. Meaning, if you ask them how consistent they are in these three different contexts, they usually give you the same response. But Japanese self-descriptions, how they describe themselves, seem to change according to context. They are much more self-critical. They're more likely to say negative things about themselves if you ask them when they're sitting next to an authority figure, like their boss, okay, or a professor, than when they were by themselves. What do you think about this contrast? Do you agree that different cultures value different levels of self-monitoring? Or in some cultures, situation plays a more powerful role than in other cultures? How about in the Taiwanese culture?
What is Taiwanese culture? I'm still trying to figure it out.
More like Japanese.
That's what I'm trying to hear from them. So you think it's more like Japanese? The others? Or how about the other cultures we have in this class? Would you consider, how about Sweden?
I think we are definitely more Japanese. That,
Really?
Yeah, I think that some situations you are required to behave in a certain way. That it doesn't matter if you have certain personality traits. If that personality trait isn't welcome in that situation, you are supposed to monitor that and
Okay.
and change yourself. I don't think we have a strong sense of always be who you are, always be who you are. Like, no, we have to get along together. So don't make anything that make other people upset.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Philip, how about your culture? We know so little about yours. What do you think?
I think culture plays a very bigger role.
Well, would you consider your culture to be high self-monitoring or low?
Probably myself.
Okay. Now, let me put you into perspective. Philip comes from, what culture exactly should I call it?
Actually, we don't have a common cultures because even our language is quite diverse. So
How about the one that you are in? Specifically to you. Okay, which country do you come from? Let's just put it out there. Solomon Islands. Which is where? I know where it is. I want you to tell them.
Pacific.
Yes, can you be a bit more specific? Next to where? Near where?
Near Australia.
Near Australia. Okay, Solomon Islands near Australia. It's a warm climate. Okay, and what culture would you call it? Do you belong to a specific ethnic group or a racial group? Or a particular clan?
Not really.
Not really, okay. But you consider your culture to be high self-monitoring, meaning people do follow guidelines in almost all situations, regardless of their personalities. Any other thoughts? How about the South Americans? No. No as in what? Low self-monitoring. Okay. The others, do you agree? Really? Yes. Well, I remember you told me that you didn't agree with the Latina culture being, or Hispanic culture being, a collectivist culture. You think it's becoming more individualistic, which is very much related to this. The rest agree? We have 3 from Panama, I think.
But since I'm from Asian culture,
Okay.
it tends to be more strict.
So you're influenced by the Asian side of your, even though you live in Panama, you're also high self-monitoring because of your Asian side. Okay. All right. So as I said at the beginning of the class, personality traits can be used as predictors to help us predict how this person would behave in a particular situation or context. And we can use trait labels such as, he's an extrovert, or he's an introvert, or he's a neurotic, or she's a neurotic, to be descriptions of how a person tends to act in certain sorts of situations, rather than a description of what he or she is like at all times in all places. And personality traits have been found to predict important life outcomes. For example, career success. Again, depending on whether the person's personality has been assessed prior to taking the job, or for that particular job. Criminal activities. Certain personality profiles are more likely to commit crimes than others. And that's why you have things like criminal profiling. Then health as well, physical health and mental health. There are certain personality profiles that might put some people at risk for schizophrenia, for example, depression. Certainly, neuroticism would be related to depression. And mortality, meaning certain personality profiles might be at risk for a shorter life, or some for a longer life. Okay? So let's think of personality in terms of the nature-nurture debate, or the biological basis versus environmental factors. We can think of it in many different ways. But let's look at the relationship between traits and biology. Okay? And one evidence coming from the biological basis of personality is that traits may grow out of an individual's temperament. The idea is our temperament, for example, how bad our temper is or how patient we are, is biological, is innate. It's something we inherit from our parents. And temperament refers to a characteristic pattern of emotion, attention, and behavior. And it's evident from early age. You can already see temperament in infancy and through toddlerhood and later. And it's determined considerably by genetic patterns between 0.4 to 0.6. Another evidence for the relationship between personality and biology, or traits and biology, is physiology. And YEE-SAN proposed that the differences we see in personality can be seen because people who are different in personalities are also different in physiology. Okay? So for example, there is evidence that introverts would be people scoring low on extroversion. Introverts often guard against stimulation from the outside. They're not as open to external stimulation. So, for example, when they're studying, introverts would not like noise. They want absolute silence when they're studying. And they would have fewer opportunities to socialize. They like to focus on one task in hand and really detest distraction. Okay, or can't cope with distraction. Introverts also have a lower tolerance for pain than extroverts. Okay, so the kind of differences that we see, why is it extroverts are extroverts? Well, because they like stimulation, they like internal, external, and are very open to external stimulation according to their bodies, okay, their physiology. Introverts also show a quicker response than extroverts, indicating more reactive brainstems. So because they have more reactive brainstems, when you give introverts a task, they are more likely to respond quickly, or certainly more quickly than extroverts. Why do you think they might have more reactive brainstems? Or why do you think introverts would show a quicker response to stimuli than extroverts?
Because they are sensitive to stimuli.
Who?
Introverts.
Introverts are sensitive to stimuli. More sensitive to stimuli.
So they can respond quicker.
Okay, so they can respond quicker, perhaps. Yes?
If you just say that they prefer to have less stimuli in the same time, they can maybe deal them more deeply or quickly.
Yeah? So if we combine these two perspectives, introverts are less interested in a wide variety of stimuli. Okay? Introverts like to focus on one particular aspect or task or stimuli. They don't like external stimulation. Now, because of that, because they focus their resources on one particular thing and it's not easily distracted, they also have heightened sensitivity. And that's why they respond quicker. Extroverts, because they're open to so many stimulations, their brain is too busy. Their brain has to deal with so many different kinds, external, internal, and therefore the brain is not able to focus on one particular stimuli, and therefore their response time would be slower, as we would expect. Okay, sensation seeking can also tell us something about the relationship between personality and physiology. Okay? And sensation seeking is also related to being reactive to stimulation or to other stimuli. And it's a personality style that tends to seek varied and novel experiences. So you would expect sensation seeking in people high in openness, for example. Okay? And this person looks for thrills and adventure and is highly susceptible to boredom. Okay? And this person is more likely to engage in risky sports and they get bored very easily. And you can see that these kind of people, people who like to seek sensations, who like to seek adventures, actually behave that way, not really because of situation, but because they have this underlying physiology that causes them to behave this way. So one evidence is from underactive neurotransmitter systems. So they look for thrills and they take risks to jog their sluggish NTM systems. So if their neurotransmitter systems are less reactive than others, they need to do more things to stimulate their neurotransmitter systems to greater activity, to get a sense of enjoyment, for example. Now, completely opposite to this is the behavior or characteristic of inhibited temperament. This is a completely contrasting personality style where the person is scared of new things. This person is not open to new situations. And you can see this in early life. As infants, for example, now remember when I showed you that video on attachment, okay, some babies, not that particular baby, but some babies show very, very intense reactions, screaming and kicking when they're very distressed. That baby that we saw was distressed, but not as distressed as other babies might be. And when these children grow up, children with inhibited temperament, you can see in kindergartens or in school that they are unwilling to approach novel stimuli. Let's say a teacher brings in something new for students to see. They're less likely to show a lot of enthusiasm for that new thing than other children. They also get very anxious in new situations. So if you bring them to a new classroom, for example, or if you bring them to a stranger's home, they're going to be more nervous and more anxious than other children who are less inhibited. Okay? And this is associated with introversion and neuroticism. And the big question is, temperament is actually one of the hardest topics to study, especially if you're trying to find out whether it's biological or it's environmental. But now, as I said, it has been found that it has a high heritability factor. So between 0.4 and 0.6, temperament is actually quite genetically determined. Okay? It has a high heritability ratio. So the idea is, well, maybe people with inhibited temperament has an overreactive brain, so meaning a brain that is too sensitive. So if there's a novel stimuli, they might react negatively to it because it's a lot more sensitive than others. And they might have a low threshold for activity in the amygdala, which causes extreme or higher levels of activations in novel situations. So it's harder for them to regulate their emotions, to calm themselves down, for example. Okay? So that was personality and biology. Now, some of you kept saying that, well, it really depends on the situation, or it really depends on the environment, or the culture, or the country. And one big factor is national character or cultural effects. Okay, it's the idea that people in different cultures have different personalities. So, for example, this goes back to stereotypes that I taught you before. Okay, what a German personality is organized, perhaps serious. Italian personality. Anyone? What is an Italian personality? Do we have any Italians or anyone with Italian blood? Anyone? Yes?
We think about them.
We, as in Germans, think about Italians as?
They are quite loud and emotional, and they like to use their hands when they are
And also flick their hair. Yeah, so, okay, one personality or stereotype, if we want to call it, would be loud, emotional, and like to use their hands a lot when talking. And the question is also that, is national character nothing more than stereotyping? Do people who, there's a particular group like the Germans, actually show those personality traits in that population? So if I gave the Big Five to all Germans, I know we had a debate whether they're Bavarians or not, but let's assume we give the Big Five to the Bavarians. Are they going to show the same, very similar scores, or similarly high scores on conscientiousness, for example? Okay, or Italians, are we going to see that most Italians score high on extroversion? Or is it just a stereotype? Or it's historical? If we always think that Italians are loud and emotional and extroverts, perhaps it's a self-fulfilling prophecy that they continue to behave that way because that's what people think about us. How about cultural personalities from other cultures? Do we have any other national characters? What would be, I'm always very curious, what is the Taiwanese character? So let's say, let's do the Big Five here. I'm not going to allow you to give me a score of 3. Okay, so you have to give me high or low. Because, or else I will have middle everywhere. So, conscientiousness. You can answer as a group, so we won't know you're particularly confident. Hi.
Low.
Okay. Openness. Sorry? We are still back to middle, aren't we? Neuroticism. There's actually research showing that Taiwanese can score quite high on this. High. Okay, why middle for these two? For those who think high, why? Why are Taiwanese high on extroversion? Okay, whoever who said Taiwanese are extroverts can't seem to give me an explanation.
I wonder if it's also an issue of comparison. Like if Taiwanese compared to people from the States, they might say low, but if you compare to
Oh no, I'm talking about self-description. not comparing yourself with other cultures, just where do you think the national Taiwanese character stands in these 5 dimensions? Why high on extroversion? So highly extroverted would be talkative, very sociable. Who told me high? Okay, so no explanation for high, so I assume it's more low than high. I certainly think Taiwanese are actually a lot quieter than many other cultures. Best example is public transportation. That's debatable though. I might say when I go on a bus, I love going on Taiwanese public buses because it's so quiet. No one talks and I can just rest and think peaceful thoughts. But you could say it's situational, that people expect you to be quiet. Loud behavior, noisy behavior is not so-called not tolerated. People don't beat you up for it. But it's kind of a general consensus, and that's what really amazes me. Why is it there's no punishment for it, but maybe it's something to do with high self-monitoring. I don't know. Openness. Now, this one we had half-half. Why high on openness? Maybe just for food? Any thoughts? High on open, I suspect some of you think openness in terms of different things, not necessarily a general. That's why we have a middle. So high on openness, let's say for food, I assume it is. If you can tolerate total food, then it must be high. No, I like it too. Not that. Anyway, high on openness for what else? Low on openness for what? In the Taiwanese character. What would Taiwanese be less open about? Debating? So you readily told me high or low, but you can't explain it. Okay. Neuroticism. All of you think low. It's interesting, but there is some evidence, I remember from research, that Asian cultures are actually not very low on neuroticism. And I think I read somewhere a clinical paper on the Taiwanese culture. Is it true? Oh, 你们没有看过？哎，你们是临床组的嘞。Okay, and agreeable, yes?
About neuroticism, I think it should actually be high because I remember my mom always telling me, like, we went overseas because they wouldn't like me to grow up in an environment that I would feel like really competitive and stuff.
Is competitiveness related to neuroticism?
Because, well, she told me like, my grandparents, because they're really like into culture here, so they tend to compare you with your classmates or stuff and your grades, so that might just make you feel worse than you are. You get low grades or something.
Okay.
I feel like all the 5 are okay to live with, but neuroticism, so it doesn't seem like a really good state to live a whole life in the States, especially if it could be related to biology or environment.
Yes.
So if people pass this test and they've been told that they are neuroticists, what do they tell them? Like,
well, there are some cases where if we find people scoring unusually high on neuroticism, so they're very low on extroversion, high on neuroticism, and maybe low on others, and high in terms of there might be a clinical problem with this person, then some of us might use that to basically advise the person. Well, do you have any depressive thoughts or depressive feelings? But usually the two don't connect. usually when people try to study personality, they try not to include clinical because you don't want people to suffer some kind of uncomfortable feeling or trauma as a result of finding themselves very high on neuroticism, for example. But it is an indicator. But it's better. It's just an indicator. For you to really clinically diagnose someone as depressive, you really need to use a clinical tool, not the Big Five. Okay, that's just an indicator that there is a risk, not a conclusion. Yeah.
So this Big Five is just related to personality, like not biology and environment. You say we should try.
Well, they are personality, so they are related to both biology and environment. For example, high in neuroticism, being very worried or very anxious or very negative. If it's related to depression, well, depression has been found to have some genetic basis to it, and which I will teach next week. I will teach depression very soon. Okay. Any other thoughts?
I think it's very hard to measure how open it is. It's very hard to evaluate. Yeah.
So let's if we look at our Big Five, statements like openness. Number 40, right? Likes to reflect, play with ideas. It's very hard to measure openness. Why? Do you think you can tell me?
Maybe you use this specific questionnaire can review, but if people who are narrow-minded, it's very hard for he to evaluate whether you know enough. Yeah. And also in Taiwan situation, we may agree with that. We are high on agreeableness, and then if you say maybe we are low on extroversion. So combine this. I'm curious whether there's an association with these two openness.
Yeah.
Because if this show that maybe we are low in openness, or we don't know. Because we are agreeableness, we don't know what big that because we agree in the first place. However, we are also introversion, so we will less.
Okay, so you mentioned an interesting. Okay, so let's say we think Taiwanese are low on extroversion and high on agreeableness. His question is, how would the combination of these two explain openness or tell us anything about openness in Taiwanese? Because you would expect introverts to be less open, right? But what's interesting about extroversion and agreeableness is agreeableness, you don't have to be looking to interact with a lot of people and socialize with a lot of people. Even if you don't interact with many people, you can still be very friendly to these people. Therefore, you have low extroversion and high agreeableness. But what does this have to, does it have anything to do with openness? Being open to new things.
Maybe there are different kind of openness. Like in Taiwan, I think people are very open to fashion and brands, and everyone needs to have the newest iPhone, iPod, whatever.
Really?
Much more than we need to have such things. But like the
But-
way of thinking.
But that's in Europe. I think in the US it's quite similar.
Yeah, in Europe we don't follow this fashion that much. So for me here, I'm always impressed how everyone has a smartphone and such.
Really?
Yeah.
How many of you has a smartphone? Less than half.
But like their way of thinking is very traditional and very conservative concerning family life, family decisions.
Okay, so less open about family rules and all that, but more open about, I don't know how to describe fashion brands stuff. Material things? Yeah, more open about material things and less open about beliefs and customs.
I think high for openness is because the location of Taiwan we are between China and Japanese and America, so a lot of things just come and we just forced to embrace this. So sometimes we become less and less resistant to new ideas. So we just face this.
Okay. So historically, because of your location, physically you're open to all kinds of influences and all kinds of infiltration, or whatever you want to call it. So it could something to do with adaptation. You start adapting to it and becoming less resistant to external forces. Starting to sound like Star Wars now. Things like that. Yeah? Any other thoughts? Okay. Oh, yes?
I just have a question on, like, when you're defining openness, because in the questionnaire it seems like it's something more internal. Like you have unconventional ideas and
You're creative, imaginative.
But agreeableness seems to be, is it more of something that you do and you agree with what other people say, or you follow suit, or? Because if I'm thinking about openness as, for example, an artistic practice.
Well, agreeableness also involves being trusting. So it's also something it's an internal self-express or self-feeling, self-centered feeling. But yes, people high on agreeableness could also be too agreeable, meaning that they're more likely to conform. So we're not actually talking about the good and bad of different personality dimensions. Because a personality profile is made up of these 5. You can't just consider a person with respect to just openness. This person will also have his or her score according to the others. But this is just one, remember, this is just one of the personality tests. Some people, for example, in the police force and others, they don't use the big 5. For certain populations, they might not use the big 5. Okay? So this is just one of the many personality tests. Now, where do cultural differences in personality... Oh, yes?
Don't you think it works like when there is no purpose? Like, for example, for the army or the police, when people know why they are doing the test, they can really more likely to influence their answer.
Right. So she's saying that wouldn't you have social desirability? So let's say you give a personality test to army potential cadet officers or people who want to be a police officer or astronaut. They know roughly what they're being tested on. For example, aggression or temper, things like that. So they might try to respond in a way that would help them get the job. But these personality tests are highly sophisticated. They do prevent deception. I won't go into that in too much detail because that's psychometrics as well. You have to, I don't just come up with variables and then ask you to fill them up. This was validated through a lot of research to test it, replicate it, and to validate it. That would be the proper term to use. So these tests used for job purposes would be able to detect deception. So either the person might score a certain way that you can see a response bias. Then you either exclude them or make them take a different test. Some tests allow that for you to see response bias or deception. Okay? All right. So where do cultural differences in personality come from? Well, one perspective is almost like evolutionary or historically, meaning that thousands of years ago, we all started with one group of very similar personalities. Okay? We were very similar once before. But as we started migrating, and we migrated because there are certain groups of human beings who decide to move, to take risks, to try new places, to try new things. And therefore, we start breaking up into more and more diverse personality profiles. Again, this is one perspective, not everything. And as we migrate, as we move to new countries or new places, new schools, new universities, etc., we engage in practices that shape the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors of those around us. Okay? And the conditions of the environment also play a role. We might show a particular personality because, for example, if I live in the North Pole or I live in a very cold place, it might be very hard for me to be extroverted because I don't even want to leave my house because it's so cold most of the time, hypothetically. Okay? So there are very simple things like climate that contributes to our personalities. You might also have between family effects, meaning that our personalities develop as a result of our family. And these are between family effects, meaning families that differ in these aspects, such as SES. So one hypothesis might be families that are low in SES have a different personality type than families that are high in SES. Okay? Let's say hypothetically that because low SES families have less money, the children are less likely to be open because they have less resources to be open with. They can't really try new things because, for example, they don't have the money to, or they just have to work 3 jobs and not do anything else. They don't have the time nor the money. Nutrition, okay? Extroversion, being very active, has something to do with what you eat as well. If you eat very high sugar diets, high sugar foods, you're going to be more active than others. Or if you take a lot of caffeine in your diet as well. Health, of course, this is in terms of physically healthy and less physically healthy. Religion. Why might religion contribute to different personality profiles? I always thought that all religions seem to promote kind of more introverted, basically low on extroversion, high on agreeableness, and low in openness. That would be my take, regardless of what religion it is. What do you think? Do you think there are certain religions that might promote a different personality profile? Very extroverted, very open type?
I think some religious persons might see themselves as very open to the universe and open to God and so on. So when they describe themselves, they see themselves as very open because they're open to spiritual things. While if someone else would describe them, they would say that they're low on openness because they only see their own religious.
Okay. Yeah. Attitudes about child rearing as well. So some cultures think that you should let the child develop himself or herself. Some cultures value discipline. So I don't care whether you're extroverted or not. You behave in a certain way because that's what kids in our culture should behave like. Okay. Within family effects, that means that within the family, it could be to do with parent-child relationships or sibling relationships, that people might develop different personality profiles. Because environments do vary for different children within the same family. Okay? You might have 2 siblings in one family, even though they've grown up together for the last 20 years. They have completely different personalities. The question is why? Yes, they might inherit different genes from each parent, but why might they develop different personalities? It could be because they have different friends to begin with. The one who is extroverted might just have very boisterous, very outgoing friends compared with the other sibling. The teachers might encourage self-expressiveness in some for one sibling and not the other. Of course, it's quite rare for siblings to go to different schools. Accidents and illnesses, meaning traumatic events or life events that might cause some people, this person might used to be an extrovert, something bad happens and this person becomes more introverted, for example. Birth order effects. Later born children, meaning not the firstborn, may be more rebellious and more open to new experiences than firstborns. Just because of the way the order in which they were born. Okay? And average correlation between personality traits of adopted children can be found to be very low with their adoptive siblings. So they share the same environment, but there's little influence on personality characteristics. Now, if you look at identical twin studies, it shows that they have the same correlation for personality, whether or not they grew up together or they grew up apart. So the differences in the environment didn't seem to play a role in personality development in twin studies. But if you compare identical and fraternal twins, meaning twins, identical and fraternal twins would not share the same genes, then identical twins were more similar in personality. So we know there are a lot of environmental factors involved in how we become who we are. But identical twin studies and fraternal twin studies seem to show their strong heritability, meaning that we are who we are really quite a lot because we got them from our parents. Probably not just from one parent, a combination from other parents, from both parents. Oh, I should skip this because this is a repetition. Now, I initially wanted you to do this, but I'm trying to look at the time now. So I think we can just kind of think about it on our own right now, rather than doing a group discussion. So what I wanted you to do originally was to consider your own personality traits and group them into those you think you inherited from your parents. Some of you might have never thought much about your own personality, but this is a way for you to do some introspection, okay? And think about the traits you think have nothing to do with your genes, but have more to do with your home, your school, or maybe you're a completely different person after coming to NTU. I don't know. Okay, so think about any dilemmas as well. So if I was going to ask all of you to tell me, well, what traits do you think you inherited from your parents? Can any of you offer any insight or comments? Okay, let me give you an example. I would say I inherited my patience from my mom, and I'm trying to figure out what I inherited from my dad. Humor, I guess. Yeah. How about you? How many of you think that you are completely different from your parents? Okay, no. So that means we think that is mostly hereditary. Well, then, just in case you're shy about revealing who you're like in terms of your parents, do you think you have any personality traits that have nothing to do with your parents? That you think for some reason comes from the environment or how you grew up or what you did, experience? Yes?
I think it's hard to see, for me at least, the difference between having inherited something and being brought up with something. Like, for instance, reliable worker. Is that something that is in my genes? Or
Sorry?
Like reliable worker.
Reliable worker, yeah. Okay.
For instance, is that something that I have inherited from my parents, or is it something that I was brought up to? My parents said that this is a good quality in you, you contribute this. So I think many of these ones are hard to see which one is inherited and which one my parents has taught me.
Yeah, yeah. How about any traits that you don't have dilemmas about, that you think it really has nothing to do with your parents? Yes?
I think talkative is something that has to do with my parents.
Okay.
I have always talked a lot, and I try to stop. At least not a good quality where I'm from. It's good to be quiet, because that means you're intelligent. But I don't have something. Yeah,
if you're quiet, you're intelligent. Okay.
Yeah, that's the view that if you're quiet, then you're intelligent, you know what you're doing. But I have always talked. And
why?
My teachers, I can't stop talking.
I know, you're telling me your trait, but why do you think so?
It's strange, because I remember when I was young, my teachers also said that don't talk so much, and my relatives don't talk.
Okay, so you got a lot of discouragement, but yet you still like to talk a lot, but why?
I think that
you're sure you didn't inherit it from your parents?
My parents don't talk so much.
How about your parents' family members?
Yeah, maybe some of them, but I think it has more to do with my other personality traits, that I respond very much to stimuli outside, but I need to talk about it to have a response from it.
Okay.
I like to see if I say, oh, this is the blue cup, isn't it?
So you can't really you can't really pinpoint. We know a lot about her now. You can't really pinpoint one environmental factor.
Yes.
Okay. Any other? Yes.
About the parents, I think you can try to copy your parents in some way, like try to avoid to do what they did if you don't like it, or try to reproduce. But the stuff you cannot avoid, unfortunately, I think is like the bad thing, like stress or fear. Usually people take, maybe, I don't know if it's part of personality, but all these...
So you're saying stress or fear you cannot avoid?
Yeah, when you're children, if the atmosphere or if your parents, it's in their gene that they're really stressed or fear or something, the children are really more likely, maybe have it in the gene, or maybe is really more likely to feel it and to...
Yeah. So, but that one would be another example where it's unclear whether it's because of the genes from the parents or the parent is being influenced by the parents' behavior. Any other traits you think have nothing to do with your parents, that for some reason you're just the way you are because of something external? Yes?
I think, like, openness. I moved a lot growing up, so I'm, in a way, brought up to be a lot more open than my parents. Like, I grew up in Malaysia, actually, and then...
Okay.
and then
I'm not sure if that's related, but...
No, but I mean, like, so, because...
No, but you said you moved a lot, so your parents have to be open to move a lot.
Right. But the way they look at things tends to be...
Right, so they might be open in some aspects, but not in others.
Yeah.
But because if you think you're open because you move a lot, it is also because it might be related to them moving a lot because they're open. So in a way, there's still a relationship to your parents.
Right. I think maybe I inherited it from them, but then the way it developed changed up different. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah.
So it shows up differently.
Yes, the expression could be different. Any other thoughts? Okay.